Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. My name's David Birnbaum. I'm a senior UX researcher at Immersion Corporation, and today I'm going to talk to you about haptic design. There are hundreds of millions of haptic devices in the world now, but as designers, we're still coming to terms with what to use them for to make a great user experience. Today, I'm going to leave you with 3 high-level design guidelines that you can take to make a great haptic user experience on your device. I always like to start with this quote: "The audience is the content." Marshall McLuhan, of course, said the medium is the message, which we all remember. But we always forget that right after that, he said the audience is the content. And I think this is especially profound for haptic device designers because this is your audience. Now, obviously, when you're walking down the street and you see someone on their cell phone, this isn't what they look like. But this is a visual representation of how people perceive their own bodies with their brains. We actually devote a huge amount of neural processing power to the lips because it's very important that we don't poison ourselves or hurt ourselves by eating something dangerous. We also have these exaggerated eyes because visual processing is so central to our everyday life. And then we have these oversized, enormous hands, and we don't really think about it. But as it turns out, we are unconsciously very much aware of what's going on in our hands and around our hands at all times. So the first design guideline is that haptics taps into embodied cognition to affect the user experience. Now, I don't think this guy would disagree with me there, but what does embodied cognition really mean? Well, it can sound deceptively simple, the idea that our cognitive processes are grounded in sensory behavior and motor actions. In other words, what we think is grounded in what we feel and what we do. But it's actually not that intuitive when you look more deeply. Here are some examples of metaphors that we use every day that tap into embodied cognition. For example, you can't say something makes my skin crawl unless you have skin and you know what that would feel like. Or when you tell somebody to get a grip, you're actually referencing the ability to manipulate an object, and that wouldn't be possible without hands. But taking it a step further, let's say we're designing an interactive experience, and in this case, we're designing a car dealership, and it's time to decide what kind of furniture we put in the negotiation room where people negotiate the price of their cars. You have 2 choices. You could choose a comfortable chair or an uncomfortable chair. And as it turns out, the right decision is more than just aesthetic. As it turns out, sitting in a comfortable chair makes you a weaker negotiator. So you'll make more money if you choose the chair on the right. Of course, the irresistible conclusion that we can draw from this is that sitting in an uncomfortable chair literally makes you a hard ass. Here's 2 people hiking up a hill. Now, if you were in this scene and you stopped them and you told them to look at the mountain ahead of them and estimate the angle of incline of that mountain, they would give you 2 different answers. Of course, the guy with the backpack, his body is weighed down and he's carrying this heavy load. And so when he looks at the mountain, he's unable to separate his thought about how steep it is from the way that he feels. And so that he will tell you that the mountain is steeper than the person who's not wearing a backpack. Which brings us to haptics. Does a tactile keyboard actually make users type faster or with fewer errors? Well, as it turns out, it does. There is a significant improvement in performance when typing on a touchscreen keyboard when you have haptics. But it's not a huge difference. What is a huge difference is the perceived performance. So when you ask users whether they were able to type faster or how many errors they made, they will think that their performance increased drastically when they have haptics on a touchscreen than when they don't. Here's kind of a representation of the data. So real performance is improved slightly over standard touchscreens, but significantly. But where the big difference comes is in perceived performance. Users think that tactile touchscreens feel a lot more like physical keyboards, so they think they type a lot faster and they make many fewer errors. Which leads us to the first design guideline. So the fact that haptics taps into embodied cognition to affect the user experience, the call to action as designers is that we can use haptics to make the phone and the tablets that we design feel more usable. And if they feel more usable, then they are more usable. The next concept that guides haptic design is that haptics fulfills a need for tactile gratification that's sorely missed. We see this all the time in our culture. We're inundated with visual imagery that we can't actually feel. For example, on the left here, there's this outdoor ad for a beer. And you might be able to see there's a structure behind the screen that's pushing through, trying to grab the beer bottle. So it's kind of a cool image, a visualization of what it would be like to grab a beer bottle. But it's inherently unsatisfying. On the right, there's a CK1 ad in New York where there's a giant billboard, and the trick is that they've photographed it so that it looks like there's a piece of glass between you and the CK1 model. And if you buy CK1, then maybe the glass comes away and she's in your world or you're in her world or something like that. But it's a really great metaphor for content on touchscreens because all of our content is separated from us by this piece of glass, and we can't actually touch it and feel it. And haptics can actually cross that divide and make content tactile. Here's an example from user interface design. Now we have these really fancy UIs on touchscreens that have these really high-res graphics with this cold steel and buttery blue glass, and you just want to reach out and touch it. But when you do, it can be a little bit disappointing because you see you don't get a really nice visual that goes along with touching it. The sound is pathetic, and you can't feel anything. And so with haptics, you can actually make a holistic user experience that makes interfaces more pleasurable to use. Now, moving beyond interface design, let's say we were designing something more immersive. Let's say an Android app where you're drinking coffee. So to do your research, you go out and you get your coffee, and you sit down and start taking notes on what it's like to drink that coffee. But no matter how close you get it, if it's not a holistic user experience where it tastes like it smells like it sounds like it feels like it looks, it's not going to be much like drinking coffee. So you need to get as close as you can with all sensory modalities. This is the example that we came up with to show this. This is an app that you can download called Guitar Solo. It's a very popular Android app. And the developer has done a really good job making the app look like a guitar. The strings even look like they're vibrating. And it sounds exactly like a guitar. But we're able, with haptics, to make the strings feel like they're resonating your phone. So now it actually feels like a guitar, and each string feels different. The result is a great user experience. The idea that haptics fulfills a need for tactile gratification that is sorely missed, the call to action is to use haptics to build more realistic and more satisfying experiences. The third guideline is that haptics is a key part of expressive and emotional connections between people. When you look at these people, you don't know them, or at least you probably don't because it's a stock photo, but you can tell a lot about these people's relationship. Even though they're not saying anything, the way that they're touching each other and the way that they're situated, you can tell how familiar they are with each other. Here are some user quotes from over the years that were really inspiring to us. This big one in the center, "There's no substitute for human touch." I think we can probably all agree on that at first, but Dave, the firefighting captain, means it in a much deeper way because for his job, he goes on site to a burning building, and he will actually run into a burning building to talk to his teammates to understand the situation. He says that he could call them on his phone or his radio, but he doesn't like to do that because there isn't enough communication available to him in that channel. On the left, sometimes you want to keep in touch, but you have nothing to write. This was a user who's in a long-distance relationship, and she would actually call her boyfriend, and they would both set the phones down next to each other on the couch and watch a movie together and say nothing. And the reason is they had nothing to say to each other. They just wanted to be co-present. And opening that voice connection to each other was somehow better than not. But with haptics, we might be able to do even better and really sit next to somebody on a couch and feel like they're there. On the right, I could have avoided a fight by touching her hand. This was a guy who said he had a big fight with his wife, and he really thought that if they hadn't been on the phone, if they had been in the same room together, they would never have let the fight get out of control because they would have been able to be emotional with each other and communicate more deeply. But on the phone, things just didn't work and got out of control. And so haptics might be able to actually improve people's relationships and quality of life. So here's the first scenario we devised based on this research. Here's a guy, he's biking to work, and he says, "No need to stop, it's just my friend saying hi." How many of us have ever gotten a message in our pocket and it buzzes and it interrupts us, but we don't know whether it's a text message we don't care about or the most important email of our lives? Haptics can actually make different messages feel different depending on what they contain or the emotion behind them. This is our prototype based on that idea. So here's your friend, she wants to get in touch with you, but instead of dialing a number or pushing a button on her touchscreen, she knocks on this piece of glass that separates the two of you, and there's some emotion that crosses that boundary. And knocking can actually be very emotional. You could knock urgently, or you could have a secret knock that only your friend knows, so when she calls, you always know it's her. In the next scenario that we drew up based on these ideas, here's two kids playing an interactive game at school. And one of them says, "That's hilarious, I can't believe she's doing this." So they're actually communicating with somebody with no words. They're just playing a game and expressing what they're thinking. This is the prototype that came out of that. It's sort of based on Pong and sort of based on pinball. And what it is a game that where you're passing a ball through the internet back and forth to each tablet. But as the ball bounces around the various game elements like the bumper and the walls, both people can feel all the haptic effects. So the illusion is that the tablets are fused together and you're playing on the same game board. It's very effective. And this final scenario says, when our fingertips cross paths, she doesn't feel so far away. This, of course, was based on that long-distance relationship. And here you have a phone, a space where you're sharing a screen together. And when one person draws his finger on the screen, the person on the other side can see it and draw their own trail. And when the trails cross, you get a tactile sensation as if you're touching the other person. And it's a very powerful, very effective, and very simple way of making it feel like you're in the same room with another person. So the point that haptics is a key part of expressive and emotional connections, the call to action as designers is to use haptics to make jaw-dropping social experiences. In sum, how to design with haptics. Make the phone feel more usable through embodied cognition. Build apps that feel more satisfying and more realistic, and create amazing emotional social experiences. And the result in the end is that the touchscreen melts away and we'll be able to interact directly with our content, and we'll be able to see it, hear it, and feel it. Thank you.